I've always had a problem with GoPro as far as their mounts go. They do not use a standard mount that'll fit on one of these guys. Very frustrating. So you know what? Today we're going to solve that with a simple solution that'll fit on this part right here, where I don't have to mess with it. So with the GoPro with the Fusion, all I have is this little type of connector right here. That's even different than their normal cameras. Now, with that said, we're going to create this. And with that, we're going to jump right in. Hit. We will be starting in Fusion 360. This whole project will be done in this one program. Okay. Now, what we're going to start off with is creating a new sketch, like always. And we're going to start by creating a square. We're going to center that square within, so we have a decent working point. Now, if you're going to be doing this, you're going to have to plan for your particular tripod. This one is designed for the tripod that I have and obviously can test on. Now, the next step will be to extrude it, and then we're going to round the corners at with a 5mm radius. So. The next step will be to create a new sketch, and we're going to go ahead and create another rectangle. As you can see, I usually do, I start off the side. For me, it's a little bit easier, and then what we'll do is do some constraints so it stays the width of the object. Then I gotta figure out the top and bottom width and get those lined up properly. And make sure everything's even off from the center, sorry. Excuse me. Next, I'm going to select the cube and we're going to expand it down to give us the part that's going to be clamped into place. Then what I need to do after that is create a couple, I think they're 45-degree angles, cut-ins, to allow for the teeth to hold the plate. Just figuring out what the angle should be and fighting with it because it didn't want to cooperate, obviously. Eventually I do get this, and there we go. Now, then I look at it, determine that the 30 degrees isn't right, and we switch over to a 45-degree angle. Alright, next I will extrude those parts out so I can remove the material that I don't need in this. Along with rounding my corners, as I did before. Looks pretty nice if you ask me at this point. So that's essentially the basics of the quick release mount. There's a few more things that we're going to need to do on the bottom before we continue on, but I need to do some extra measuring here. Once I get a few things situated, I'm going to go ahead and measure the peg that helps support and prevent it from falling off the tripod. Let's move on to the next part of this project, which is creating the peg holes, the openings to hold that peg and the secure pin into place, or allow it to be able to utilize the secure pin. I could have ignored this part altogether, and if I did, it wouldn't have made much of a difference. All this does is helps me prevent this piece from falling off the tripod. If it's loose and slides around, the pin will catch it or keep it caught and prevent it from coming off the tripod until the little peg button for it is pressed. And the way I'm doing this is obviously a new sketch, and then I'm going to create the squares I need to cut in, and then I'm going to round the corners for it for support. I didn't want to create a too big of a gap because I didn't want to have to worry about bridging overall, and this was actually the right solution for this because this worked really well in the end of it. So as soon as I'm done doing all my measurements, I'm going to take those two parts and expand it out or expand it in to create the sunglasses. Now that I got those pieces in, I'm rounding the corners for aesthetic purpose. Well, not even aesthetic purposes. It's just going to help things with strength. So let me finish that up and then we'll go on. Alright, the next step is to go back to the top and we're going to create the mount for the GoPro camera. After I check a few things and do a couple tests. Okay, now moving on to the top part, we're going to create the mount for the camera. And like I said, unfortunately, this is the style that GoPro goes with, which is not a standard to most cameras, but it may be actually more secure than the 1/4-inch screw, so really can't fault them for that. And as you can see, I've created this in two separate parts. My plan is if I need to make different versions of this, it's going to be pretty easy to go back and make those changes without having too much trouble. Also give me more options and more flexibility as to creating other designs that can utilize the camera. I do have a plan for the camera in the future that I will be creating another specialized mount for. Alright, so I'm creating the 5-inch radio along with another 7.5 radio cut. So obviously there are two slots at both the same size, so I took the part, I duplicated it, and we're lining everything up properly. Again, keeping in mind that I need to add that tolerance in the opening. That's why I got 3.2. This gives me just enough space where it's nice and tight, but it fits in without a struggle. Because you got to keep that in mind when you're working with a 3D printer. You got to know your tolerances. What the spacing will allow for the extruded plastic to make things work properly. And that's what I've done there. Now continuing on, we are making some more minor adjustments, and we're gonna, whoops, what did I do there? Anyways, back to what we're doing, making our quick adjustments, but getting our little nut hole set up properly, lined up circle, so everything fits correctly. Here I did not do any tolerance because I want a nice tight fit to the point where it cannot be moved. So you gotta pick and choose which parts require that kind of adjustment. And in that case, I didn't need that kind of adjustment. Matter of fact, it'd be bad if I did. All right, now I'm gonna, for a couple of reasons, be able to hold the piece and be able to give it a little bit more strength, I think. Well, aesthetic look anyways. I rounded the edges. And this way, I don't have any sharp edges to scratch or anything. Well, this is still capable of scratching. Now, I'm adding a little divot in to help with the locking, to make sure there's enough thread to screw the nut, you know what I mean, sorry. And then I'm going to add a little bit more tweaks. I'm going to combine the two parts in a separate, at least in a separate area, and keeping the two other parts separate so I can utilize them in the future. There we go. And now we're done and ready for an STL file to be printed. popping it off the plate, getting that out of the way, and let's take a quick look at what we got. Unfortunately, the PLA I used on this was there's something wrong with it. I think it's there's too much moisture in it. It was the first PLA I ever bought. It was a really cheap brand, but that's okay. Testing it and seeing which part worked, which part didn't. It kind of worked, but kind of it kind of didn't work right. It worked, sort of worked, but it sort of didn't. It didn't tighten the camera was fine. That wasn't the issue. The issue came to the base. I was off on my measurements a little bit, and the mount just kind of shuffled around more than anything else. And as you can see, the height was wrong. So I went back in, and we're going to make those adjustments, and then I'm going to reprint it. And we're going to try some high temp PLA from Protopasta and see how that goes. Alright, let's pop this off the plate and see the results. I'm not too happy with the top. This stuff is not a very pretty, it's really rough, and it's extremely fragile. I was very disappointed with the quality of the material. And yeah, that so did not work. Okay. Yeah. Well, I can still check to make sure certain things work with it. So we'll do that, and if I'm happy with the results, we'll continue with a different material. This is kind of a disappointment. I was looking forward to use this PLA. It was carbon fiber, which is kind of cool, and now, well, it's unfortunate. They're 2 pieces of paper. It's in 2 pieces, and I'm not going to bake this, and I'm not going to utilize this. It's all going bye-bye, which is kind of disappointing. All right. Okay. Now a quick test for the parts, see if everything works and lines up. And still need some adjustments, which is fine because I'm not happy with the print rate, obviously. So we're going to go to a different material, and we are going to make a couple more quick adjustments. I'm going to do that off camera. Sorry for that. It's nothing you haven't seen already, so I think the next part you'll see the final results. Alright, now this is going to be interesting because this is the first time I've printed PETG with this printer, and it actually came out pretty decent, but the piece itself isn't perfect. And yes, I'm not going to use this for the final part. I don't know, feel I have a different material that'll work better. It's a high temp PLA from Protopasta. It's just one of their more standard ones. All right. With that, let's take a look at a few pictures and thank you everyone for watching. Please subscribe for more content in the future. Catch you guys in the next one.